The biggest threat to many motorcycle dealers over the next decade may not be inventory alone. It may be the cost structure of the dealership itself. Inventory gets attention because it is visible. You can walk the floor, count the units, measure the age, and feel the pressure. But inventory is only one part of the problem. The deeper issue may be that many dealerships are still carrying a physical and financial structure built for a different economic environment than the one now taking shape. Large facilities, premium retail footprints, dedicated service infrastructure, branded environments designed to signal permanence, confidence, and strength. All of that made sense in an era where the model could absorb it more easily. The question now is whether the same model still works under current conditions. For years, a large standalone dealership signaled strength, bigger showroom, bigger service department, more physical presence, more apparent commitment to the brand. The footprint itself became part of the value proposition. To the customer, it looked established. To the manufacturer, it looked committed. To the operator, it looked like the correct expression of scale. And in many cases, it was. But visual strength and economic strength are not always the same thing. A large footprint can communicate confidence, while quietly carrying a level of fixed cost that becomes increasingly difficult to absorb when retail conditions weaken, margins tighten, or throughput slows. That is the problem. The issue is not that these dealerships were irrational when they were built. The issue is that the assumptions underneath them may no longer hold as well as they once did, because fixed costs do not flex. That is the defining problem. Rent or mortgage, utilities, facility maintenance, property burden, management payroll, service equipment, taxes, administrative load, and infrastructure overhead remain in place whether unit sales are strong or weak. The building does not care about your unit count. The service department does not become cheaper because showroom traffic softened. The occupancy burden does not shrink because financing tightened, insurance costs rose, or customer demand became less predictable. That is why fixed cost pressure is so dangerous. It keeps running whether the business is moving fast enough to support it or not. And once the cost base becomes too heavy relative to throughput, the business starts carrying structural strain, even if everything still looks polished from the outside. That brings us to the real issue. The problem is not just expense. The problem is insufficient economic throughput to absorb the expense. A large footprint requires a certain level of commercial productivity to justify itself. That productivity can come from new units, used units, service, parts and accessories, apparel and licensing, finance, events, foot traffic, and total customer activity across the store. But if that footprint carries too little retail velocity, too little service absorption, or too little productive traffic, the economics start to strain. Under-absorbed overhead becomes the real burden. This is where many operators get trapped. They focus on inventory age, on margin, on local promotion, on staffing adjustments, on short-term levers. And all of these things matter. But underneath them is a more serious question. Is the footprint itself still economically appropriate for the revenue base it's expected to support. Because if the answer is no, then the business is fighting uphill before the next unit is even sold. This is where the standalone single brand model becomes more vulnerable. That does not mean every standalone dealership fails. It means the margin for error narrows. A single brand operation with a large dedicated facility has fewer places to spread fixed cost. It is more dependent on one product family, one demand pattern, one traffic stream, and one brand level economic reality. When conditions are strong, that can still work very well. But when conditions become less forgiving, the same structure becomes more exposed. The larger the footprint, the more consistently the dealership has to perform in order to justify it. The heavier the infrastructure, the less room there is for weak absorption, and the more dependent the store is on a single commercial engine, the more fragile the economics can become if that engine slows. That is why the question is becoming harder over time. Not because the category disappears, not because dealers suddenly become less capable, but because the structure itself can become too heavy for the commercial environment supporting it. This is also why multi-line integration becomes such an important part of the conversation. A multi-line environment changes the equation. Shared real estate, shared staff, shared service infrastructure, shared customer traffic, and multiple revenue streams all allow fixed costs to be spread across more opportunities. That matters. It means the same square footage can support more than one commercial engine. It means service bays can serve a broader mix. It means one roof can absorb more activity without requiring entirely separate infrastructure for each brand. It may not be as visually pure as the standalone model. It may not satisfy the same brand expression ideal, but it can be far more rational economically. And that distinction matters more than people are sometimes willing to admit, because the future will not be decided by aesthetic preference. It will be decided by economic survivability. If the footprint is too large, the burden too fixed, and the throughput too narrow, then the model eventually comes under pressure, whether anyone wants to say it out loud or not. And if nothing changes, the restructuring will still happen. It will just happen through pressure instead of design. That can mean accelerated attrition, shrinking networks, closure of weaker points, consolidation, smaller formats, shared facilities, or the gradual disappearance of operators who simply cannot keep carrying infrastructure that no longer matches the economics of the business. In other words, if rationalization does not happen deliberately, it may happen anyway. That is the harder truth. This is not an argument against dealers. It is not an argument against brands. And it is not a claim that every large dealership is suddenly unworkable. It is a structural observation. Many dealership footprints were built for a stronger retail era than the one the industry now faces. The question is no longer whether the current model is under pressure. The question is whether it can adapt in time. Because if it cannot, then the next decade will not simply test dealer performance. It will test dealer structure. And those are not the same thing. If you work inside the powersports business and want clearer analysis of the forces shaping dealer economics, market structure, and network performance, subscribe to PSX, the Standard.